There we go. So I'm recording now, guys. As you know, if you've been to our sessions before, we do record all the sessions and you get a copy of the slides. And we also upload this onto YouTube. So feel free to like and subscribe our channel. Lots of free content there. And the whole purpose behind these lunch and learn sessions are that they're short and sharp, based on priority hot topics in the sector. At the moment, and they are for you to use with your teams. So don't reinvent the wheel. If you found this session useful, then please do share the link on with your colleagues. But welcome to today's session. It is all around supported decision making. For those of you who haven't met us before, there are some new names here, which is great. My name's Kathy, and we have Kate up waving away in somebody's corner. Hopefully you can see her. And we are the team at Thrive. We are both clinicians. I'm a registered nurse and Kate is an OT. And we are very passionate about supporting people who support older people across Australia and the world, no matter what role you're in. So we do lots of training, education, and we've been doing lots of service support as well lately in preparation for the new Aged Care Act and Aged Care Standards and all of the related changes and topics. So if you would like to know more about us, feel free to reach out for a chat. I'm more than happy to do so. Some housekeeping from today. Yes, like I said, please put yourself on mute. We will have time for questions at the end, and we do stop the recording so that you can feel free to ask questions and take yourself, put your camera on if you wish. We will use the chat function. Kate will be monitoring that. So if you have some questions that you want to write down so you don't forget, please do so, and we'll get to them at the end. And like I was saying, this session is recorded, and please do share amongst your teams. So today's session, we are really going to be focusing on supported decision making and having a real deep dive into what does that actually mean and what does it look like. We're going to have a look at what our current approach is around communication and decision making with older people. And we're going to talk about the changes to supporters and supported decision making under the new Aged Care Act and the various other documents that come under the Aged Care Act as well. And then we're going to give you some food for thought pointers on how to go about implementing these legislative changes and how to support our teams to do so as well, because it is a bit of a shift in thinking that we are going to have to take. So I want to start off with this quote. I am old enough to make my own decisions. And I would love to hear from you in the chat or put your thumb up if you agree with this statement. Yep. Oh, thumbs going everywhere. Yep. I love the shocked face. Yep. Lots of yeses. So I'm thinking that everybody agrees with this statement. Yeah. And I think that's pretty fair. I agree with it too, because we are all adults in this room, I'm going to assume, because I'm assuming that you all work in this industry. Therefore, we've made lots of decisions throughout our lives. Yep, we've made decisions as adults. We've made decisions when we are young adults, as children. And, have our decisions always worked out as we wanted? No. Have we made good and bad decisions? Yes. But ultimately, we are old enough as adults to make our own decisions as well. And, think about the consequences that come with making those decisions. So now I want to think about how we go about making decisions. Yeah. And I, again, want you to think about yourself. And I want you to think about when you need to make a decision in your life, do you, A, discuss your thoughts with others? So friends or family, specific people for specific topics. B, make the decision by yourself with no supports. C, have someone else make the decision for you. So hands off, don't want to know about it. Or D, does it depend on what the decision is? And pop your answer in the chat, either just the letter or your thoughts as well. Oh, I can already see lots of D's. B, yeah. Lots of B's and D's in here. Yeah. So either making the decision for yourself with no support, or it depends on what the decision is. And I have to say, I thought about this and I'm probably a D. Yeah. So it really depends on what the situation is for me. So, for example, I just had lunch. I had two options in my head, the good version and the less good version. But I didn't ask for anyone's assistance with that. I just went with the good version, just in case you were wondering, the healthy version. But when I go to a restaurant sometimes, particularly if I've had a long day or I don't really care, I just want something to eat and I can't narrow down the menu, I will say to the waiter, these are my 2 or 3 food options. Just surprise me, make a choice for me. Yeah, because I actually can't be bothered making that decision, but I've narrowed down the choices that I want that decision to be made from. But I will hand that over to the waiter. When I made a big decision around buying a house, I had people help me make that decision. Yeah. But they didn't make that decision for me. And I was very specific about who I involved in that conversation. I had 2 specific friends and I had my partner, and I took them through the house at separate times because I wanted their different opinions. Yeah, because they have different viewpoints. So what they did when they helped me out, they supported me to make my final decision. So they would come in and, for example, one friend would talk about the layout of the house and, what do you think about this? Or this doesn't quite meet what you were after. What about A, B, and C? Another friend pointed out, for example, hey, it's close to a coffee shop and that's really important to you. And there's really nice walking tracks. That's also really important to you. And then asked questions around, can you afford the payments? What are your concerns? What don't you like about the house? What do you like about the house? So at no point did they make the decision for me, but they supported me by asking questions and knowing me as a person and knowing what's important to me and having that conversation to help me make the decision that was right for me at that time. Yeah. So do any of those scenarios sound familiar to you guys? And they probably do in some way, or you can resonate with different scenarios for yourselves because that's how we all live our lives. Yeah. So as adults, we make decisions every day. We choose what information we want to share with others, and we don't necessarily want our whole friendship group or our whole family group involved with having information about us or be involved with conversations about a particular topic. Yeah. So like I said, I had 2 specific friends and my partner who came through the house. I didn't invite my whole friendship group and I didn't invite my family. Yeah. I was very particular about who I involved in that process. And that's what we need to consider when we are thinking about supported decision making. Okay. What does that actually mean? It is around who is involved with the process of helping a person make a decision. Yeah, pretty straightforward. It's all around helping individuals make an informed choice, but ultimately the decision goes back to that person. So now I want to move on and I want to talk about a scenario. Okay. And touch wood, this doesn't happen. But imagine this, and I'm talking about myself now. So imagine me as one of your clients or a new resident, a client, a patient, a resident, whoever, but I'm in my 40s. Okay. So I've had a fall at home and I've broken my leg. And I'm going to be off my feet for at least 12 weeks, probably longer, because it's quite a nasty break. Because of this injury, I've got surgical appointments, I've got wound care, I've got community nursing coming to provide that, I've got fortnightly GP visits, I've got twice weekly physiotherapy, I'm on strong pain relief because it's a nasty injury, and I'm also feeling a bit depressed because I've had a really big change in my circumstances. Yeah, I'm a very active person. I'm a very social, independent person, and my whole life has been turned upside down by this injury. So at the moment, I'm needing some assistance with personal care, with food preparation, and with transportation. So basic, the basics. Yeah. So in your roles where you're currently working, what you're doing now, I want you to think about this. So if I was your patient or your client, who would you communicate with about my care needs, my choices, and my preferences? Would you be talking to me or would you be talking to my partner, who's my main person? You with an exclamation mark. Love it. Yeah. Yeah. You and family as required. Yeah. You. Amazing. So lots coming back to me and involving my partner or family as required. You can still make your own decisions. Love it. Okay. This is great. And I love the fact that you've seen from this case scenario that I can make my own decisions. Yeah. And I'm just reading through all your comments now. Amazing. Depends on my capacity, which is a great point. So in this scenario, I've got no issues with my capacity. I'm feeling a bit flat because of my circumstance. Yeah. It's significant change. Oops. Sorry. Now I want you to consider this exact same scenario, but I want you to change it from me as a 44-year-old to Mary, who's an 86-year-old. And would that change your answer if this scenario is exactly the same? And I want you to take a minute and think about, would it actually be the same approach, or do we do things slightly differently when we have older people accessing our services? And you can put it in the chat or you can think about it to yourself. But I can say I've been in this industry for over 20 years and we get out and about to a lot of different services. And what we do see is that we don't go to that 86-year-old Mary. When 86-year-old Mary suddenly needs some assistance in the home or is moving into residential care for some assistance, we pivot our attention from Mary to Mary's daughter or Mary's next of kin unintentionally. Yep. And that might be that we bypass Mary altogether, or it might be that we talk to Mary, but then we also talk to Mary's daughter, son, next of kin. Yeah. And what we really need to be aware of is that nothing in this scenario had changed. My capacity hadn't changed. The only thing that had changed was my age. So we need to be really careful when we're supporting older people that we are not breaching human rights. Yeah, and which is going to lead me into the next slide. And like I'm saying, I'm not saying that this is intentional. It's just the way that we have operated for the last several decades. Okay. And I will read through your comments later. Kate's monitoring them for me. Now, here I've got a really powerful quote, which was in the recently released Older Persons Advocacy Network Presenting Issues report, which comes out each year. And if you haven't heard of OPAN, they are the peak body for advocacy for older people across Australia. And I really encourage you to have a look at their website because they've got really good resources which are written in plain English. And I really do like their webinars as well because they break things down really simply, I think. So this is a quote from their recent report. And it says, and I've bolded in black the important points and in red the really important points, okay? So breaches of older people's human rights across their aged care journey continue to be a dominant theme in 2025. Day-to-day breaches show that ageist and ableist attitudes persist throughout the system. Aged care assessors and providers continue to communicate with and provide information to other people and exclude older people seeking or receiving aged care services. And this occurs even when there is no active and relevant substitute decision-making authority in place for the older person, and the older person is able to make decisions for themselves. So would love to hear your thoughts on this quote, but this is based on feedback. This is based on data. Okay, so this isn't something that's just being said, you know, as a quote thrown out there. This is actually based on information that they gather each year, and I found it really interesting, and it really relates back to that scenario that we just spoke about. And again, it is not through bad intentions. It is through good intentions. But we really need to shift our thinking as we move towards November 1 and these once in a generation aged care reforms and how we do things differently, because the focus is now really on that supported decision making. Yep. And the assumption that older people can make decisions for themselves unless shown otherwise. Okay, so we're flipping it around, and the feedback that you guys have put in the chat is great because it sounds like you're already doing it or are on the right track as well. So when we consider what supported decision making and what it actually means, it is the process of providing support to older people to help them to make and communicate their own decisions and remain in control of their own lives. Yep. So again, just like we spoke about with those scenarios, it is really around offering support to older people as adults to the level of support that they want or request or need. But it is really around ensuring that you assume that older people are able to make a decision for themselves first and foremost, and then work backwards from there, which is a bit of a shift in thinking for us. So why are we talking about this topic? I think you guys have probably had it on the back of your mind or the front of your mind a lot lately, but there are new requirements for us to do things differently around supported decision making, and this is legislated. So it is included within the new Aged Care Act, which comes into play next Friday. It is entwined in the Strengthen Aged Care Standards, and it's also within the Statement of Rights as well. So we need to talk about this topic because we do need to make some changes, and we need to make some changes because there are these new legislative requirements, and also because there are changes to registered supporter roles, which information is still coming out as late as yesterday. But we also need to think about our teams. So we might be right across supported decision making, but what about our teams? And what about older people? And what about older people's supporters themselves? Yep, the family who want to be really involved, and the family who want to be updated regularly about, mum's attendance at activity programs, or wants to be called after mum has a fall. How are we going to share this information to make sure that mum is happy for her daughter to be called with every bit of information? Yeah. So we need to take a pause and think about what practices we currently have, and we need to be honest, because again, this isn't finger pointing or blaming, but we can all do things differently and better. And some things we do really well, and other things we think that we do, but then in practice, we actually have some gaps. So we really need to take that pause and think about what the practices are that we currently have and why we take this approach. Yeah. So we need to also, us, then you know that we always start with the why, because if you don't have the why, then you cannot get to the how. Okay, so we need to understand the why we do things, and then we need to think about how we are going to change that mindset of our teams when it comes to older people's rights to be supported with decision making. How are we going to address, I can see some comments popping up, which I'll address later, but how are we going to address these thought patterns that we've had in place for a long time, and how are we going to shift that narrative, and how are we going to look at our policies and procedures about what we've just done to ensure that it actually meets the new approach is the word I'm looking for, the new approach. So not only meeting the legislative requirements, but it is around changing that approach for ensuring that older people's human rights are being met. Now, like I was saying, and I feel for you guys who are out and about in this aged care space at the moment, because it is frustrating for us as well that there are still resources and still information that is being released as late as yesterday around these significant changes. And, these come into play 1 November. So just know that we, everyone is in the same boat. Everyone is doing the best that they can. So keep it up. It is a hard slog. But, the ideas behind these reforms and these changes are really important, and they are going to be hugely beneficial once we get through this teething period. Okay. So this is one of the policies that was released from the department on the 13th of October. And there's a number of documents that were released on the 13th and yesterday as well. And I'll send you those links in this email that you'll get with the presentation as well, so you don't have to try and find them. But this is the policy around what supported decision making is. And it explains that the Act is the legal framework for the registration of supporters. Yeah. So we used to have representatives and decision makers, and that has now shifted to a different approach. So this is around the requirements for supporters and how this policy describes how it's going to support decision making across the aged care system. So this document in particular is worth having a look at and sharing with your teams. But I am going to touch on what registered supporters actually mean and what they look like, because they changed on the 13th of October as well. So when we are talking about registered supporters, this is for older people to be able to register people who are able to provide them support to make decisions. They are not, the supporter and the supporter light, which I'll talk about in more detail, are not able to make decisions on behalf of the older person. This is where the confusion is, rightly so, and where a lot of the angst is that we see out and about, is that how do we know that these supporters, who could be friends, who could be neighbours, who could be family members, are not doing the wrong thing by the older person? And what we need to remember is we need to take that pause. This is like your phone a friend, yeah, that we spoke about earlier. We all have people who we will call, or we might ask for assistance with certain conversations or certain information. That is what the intention is behind these registered roles. So the intention is the supporter and the supporter light cannot make decisions on behalf of the older person, and they cannot coerce the older person to make a decision which doesn't follow their will and preference. So there are obligations for the supporters to follow themselves. So they need to act in the best they need to act in the best interests of the older person. They cannot coerce them, and they need to be aware of, the older person's wills and preferences. So you can't come in and say, "Hey, Kate, I reckon you should move down to this facility here because it's better." It's not about that. It's really around supporting Kate to make that decision for herself. Okay, and I'll talk about that in a bit more detail. The first thing that we need to remember, even if someone has a registered supporter, is that every older person you need to presume that they have the ability to make their own decisions. Okay, so first and foremost, biggest change, we need to assume that your resident, your client, has the ability to make their own decision. And then we work backwards from there. So does that person need a bit of, does that person want to access somebody to help them to look at information or assess information to make a decision, but they're not making that decision on their behalf? When older people have been determined that they cannot make a decision for themselves, that is when that substitute decision maker kicks in, and it depends on what state you're in around those processes. Yeah. But again, it is around making sure that we have assessed for capacity. And we need to remember as well that just because a person has a diagnosis of dementia does not mean that they cannot make some decisions for themselves. Okay, so this is where we need to shift our thinking as well, because we need to offer a level of support to the degree needed to assist that person make a decision. And I apologize because I'm going to go over time, I can see already, but it's a lot to get through. When we are talking about registered decision makers, an older person can have more than one. Okay, which gives people anxiety as well. But again, remembering that the supporters and the supporter light roles cannot make decisions on that older person's behalf. So the differences between these roles, and again, these were released on October the 13th, so they changed from the previous versions. So a registered supporter is someone who has been given consent by the older person to receive certain information about them. So if an older person has a registered supporter, so let's say I have Kate and you as the provider, I say to you, can you please give Kate a copy of my care plan? Then you need to do so. Kate might be my neighbor. Kate might be my friend from 20 years. It doesn't matter because you need approve to be a registered supporter. You need my approval and you need Kate's approval. Yep. And it's registered in My Aged Care. So this is the big difference. So we need to make sure that that information, if it is requested by me to be given to a supporter, is provided. And again, I could have one supporter, I could have 10 supporters, which is highly unlikely. Yeah. A supporter light is a person who has been registered with the consent of the older person, but the older person has not given consent for them to be given certain information. Yeah. So if I've chosen Kate as a supporter and I say give her a care plan, that's great. You do so. If I've chosen Kate as a supporter light, that means I'm having a conversation with Kate and you can have a conversation with Kate, but Kate shouldn't be given any written information about me. Okay. Again, this is new out, so we kind of have to get our head around how this thinking and how we're going to communicate these key roles with our teams. A supported guardian is a registered person who has the same role and duties as a supporter. So they will be given information relating to my care, but they also have guardianship or power of attorney or similar legal authority. Okay. So this is replacing the old representative decision maker with these three roles. Okay. So a little bit to get your head around, and again, we'll send you some resources to read through as well. But the important thing is to remember is that there can be more than one supporter. But having a supporter doesn't mean that the older person can't make a decision or do something for themselves. So we don't automatically now bypass me and go straight to Kate as a supporter either. You should always be coming to me first and then following my wishes. Okay. This doesn't stop people from having your friendship group outside of registered supporters. Okay, so I might have 3 registered supporters, but I might have, other friends who come and visit me and have a chat, and we can have a casual conversation about decision making as well. So this is just formalizing the process, and it's really around making sure that we are assisting older people to be supported to make their decisions, but also making sure that there are safeguards in place. So people need to act in the right manner. So if you're consenting, which is a requirement to be a registered supporter in any of these roles, then there are requirements that you do the right thing, essentially. And there will be consequences if you don't, and there will be ways that you can report somebody if you have concerns that they're not acting in the best interests of the older person. So again, this is a nice summary of what people can do in the 3 different roles, and highlighting again that it doesn't stop an older person from being able to receive information, make decisions, or communicate directly with others. And that includes My Aged Care, assessors, aged care providers. Yeah, it is really around ensuring that we must continue to go directly to the older person for decisions, even when there is that registered supporter. So like I was saying, there are duties and responsibilities with this role. So requirement is that you prioritize the will and preferences of the person. So you can't come in with your own bias and your own ideas. You should be acting in the based on what, like I was using with my house scenario. Yeah. So you should be thinking about what is it that the person would like, what's their lifestyle like, what kind of things would they like to do, and focus on that. It's not about what you want as the registered or what they want as a registered supporter. Promoting the person's culture and well-being, that they're only supported as much as the person needs, avoiding conflict of interest. And again, really important to know that there are legal duties. So people can opt out of being a registered supporter because there is requirements that you do the right thing. Yeah. And people who are currently representatives within My Aged Care at the moment will automatically change over to these new roles on November, well, apparently, yeah, on November 1. Okay. So I say tongue in cheek. Moving on, because I am wary of time. I know you guys are busy, but I want to just point out where supported decision making and registered supporters fit in amongst the new aged care standards. Obviously standard 1, which is the person, so that makes complete sense. And again, you'll get these slides and highlighted in bold where it specifically mentions supported decision making. It is in with standard 3, which is care and services, and also in standard 5, which is clinical care as well. And yes, the statement of rights as well. Supported decision making is really highlighted. And again, this is one of OPAN's posters. So I encourage you to look at their resources because they're written aimed at older people or their, the general public. So these break down really the statement of rights themselves, the key areas, and they give you some really good scenarios. And the one circled in red is around a case example, and this is a real case example of when we do things with good intentions, but we're actually breaching unintentionally the human rights. And this is around Cecily, who had a really well-intentioned daughter and manager at her facility, and Cecily used to get visited by her friends each week, but Cecily's daughter noticed that she was really tired after this group visited, and she asked the manager to get them to stop coming. So good intentions behind that because they wanted to make sure Cecily wasn't overwhelmed and too tired. However, Cecily wasn't involved in that decision. Yeah. Perfect example of how we go about things with good intentions, but we unintentionally bypass the older person without thinking. So some really good scenarios in there as well. Some other common scenarios which we might not consider around bypassing the older person with information sharing. And again, going back to having these conversations with the older person about what information they want to be shared and when. So we commonly, and I'll have to read the chat comments properly, but falls or incidents are a common scenario where we automatically call a family member to let them know that the resident who's had a fall, so in this case John, has had a fall, but he's fine. And I'm not saying don't do that at all. What I'm saying is we need to make sure that John's happy with that. Because have we actually asked John if he wants us to call his daughter, or is it that his daughter wants us to call her when these things happen? Because we need to be really careful now about, have we had these conversations and are we doing things just because we've decided it's best practice? But is it actually what the resident themselves want? Another scenario, and these are, based on real situations. Bill has a neighbour, Jerry, who's always giving him good advice, and Bill wants his home care provider to share information about the agreement, but the provider refuses to do so because Jerry is just his neighbour. Yeah. Yes. And Frank wants to reduce the number of medication he takes. So the GP calls and discusses these changes that he's made for Frank, but he calls Frank's son to have that conversation as well to make sure Frank's son's happy. Okay. Common situations. So I'm sure that there are some other ones that you can think about as well in your workplace that we do without thinking, and somewhere where we need to focus a bit of our attention. Some of the factors on why we take this approach is, we have the concerns around older person doesn't have capacity to make decisions because of their cognitive impairment. And that's a whole topic presentation on its own because we all vary in our decision-making capacity across a day. Yeah. Some of us function better at different points of the day, and some of us make better decisions at different times of day when we're not tired or we're not stressed or we're not unwell. So it's the same for people living with cognitive impairment. They can make decisions, it's possible that they can make decisions with the right support at the right time about certain things. Okay, so we can't just say somebody has a diagnosis of dementia, so forevermore we're going to talk to their next of kin, because it's not right. So this is where we need to do a little bit of work and probably prioritize some more thinking and planning. We sometimes bypass the older person, or we listen to the older person's decision, but then we'll have a conversation with somebody else because we think that the decisions are risky. Well, we went back to that first slide and, I'm an adult and I can make my own decisions. I'm sure that we have all can think of at least 3 questionable decisions that we've made that other people haven't agreed with. Okay. So it's around weighing up the risk and the benefit, and again, supporting the older person to their ability to make that decision. Again, the older person's family are insistent that they receive updates from the service about that person. And again, this is a culture shift. It's not going to happen overnight because it happens everywhere. But we are going to have to think about how we're going to support this culture shift over time, that it's not mandated that you communicate with a resident's daughter because they want that information. We need the permission from that older person. We have concerns that we need to show the Commission that we've communicated changes about the older person. Yep, so we interpret things a certain way with legislative requirements. We have policies that tell us we have to do so. And again, we might have had policies, but that we need to review them and see, do they reflect these current, the new changes that are coming in next week? And we have those concerns, like I was saying, that the supporter is taking advantage of the older person, or we have concerns about elder abuse, and rightly so. But that's why there are these safeguards that have been put in place to minimize the risk. And again, reinforcing with your team and yourselves, supporters and supporter light cannot make decisions on behalf of the older person. Cannot. It's supporters to make a decision. Yeah. So really important point to reinforce, because that's where we can get a little bit bogged down and go down this direction when really we need to be going down this direction. And again, it's just that change in mindset and thinking. So where to start with these changes? And these are some questions that I would go away if I was in my management position that I've been in before, and I would be thinking about, how do we know who our client or our resident supporters are, and how are we going to know what kind of supporter they are? And again, in the links that I'm going to send you with this recording and presentation, there is information about how you'll be notified or not notified about who registered supporters are. Okay, so have a look at that document as well. But how are you going to know when you get a new admission? How are you going to know if somebody suddenly decides to have a registered supporter? Do we ask at reviews if preferences have changed for the older person? Like, how can we embed that into our resident of the day or our bi-monthly review? How can we look at our processes so that we just build it as business as usual? It's a question that we just ask people. Have your preferences changed about communication? Where are we going to document and capture who these registered supporters are, or supporter light? Yeah, look at your systems. Don't reinvent the wheel, but how can you ensure that you're capturing this information, and how are your team going to know who these people are? Yeah, and what they can actually receive. How are you going to educate your older people and their supporters about these key changes and their rights and responsibilities, importantly, because we've been doing a lot of different reviews and service support. So we've been out and about everywhere. And this is an area where we haven't done a lot in this space. And I think it's because we're trying as an organisation to get our staff across these changes, but we mustn't forget about our residents and their representatives or family members as well. So how can we go about educating these group on this information? Again, how are we going to educate our teams? And, what are the policies and procedures or processes about information sharing that need to be reviewed to make sure they capture these requirements? Lots to think about, and I know there's lots going on. It is a work in progress. 1 November is one day. It is not going to happen overnight with all of these changes that are happening, but it's just that mindset shift and being, thinking about the positives and, the purpose behind these changes, and then getting through the processes, which will, everyone, again, like I was saying, is in the same boat. So in summary, really important. We need to assume that older people can make their own decisions. Older people have a right to be supported to make their decisions, just like we are supported to make decisions ourselves as younger adults. Supporters can be formal or they can be informal. There are legal duties for registered supporters. And there are processes to cancel or suspend a registration of a supporter if there is concerns that they are abusing that position. Older people with cognitive impairment should still be supported to make a decision to their level of ability. We shouldn't be assuming they can't because they have cognitive impairment. And an appointed decision maker can only make decisions if the older person's, if that legal authority is active. So a substitute decision maker doesn't kick in until that person does not have the capacity to make decisions. So you can't just you can't just decide that the substitute decision maker or the substitute decision maker can't decide when they're taking over the decision making. We need to make sure that we are going through the right processes there. So apologies, 10 or 11 minutes over actually, but I thought I would wrap this up with, no decision about me without me, which summarizes supported decision making really nicely. If we take this approach and we think about how we would want to make a decision in our own lives and we, put that into the workplace with the older people that we support, then we're going to be on the right track. So thank you so much. I will, this is a feedback slide. As always, we want to develop these sessions based on your needs and interests. So please do take less than a minute. It's 4 questions, I think, to let us know how today's session was. Do share this recording and the slides with your teams, and I will stop recording and we can take some questions and I'll have a look through the chat. But otherwise, thank you guys and enjoy the rest of your day and keep at it. We're all in this together. So thank you. And